Hello? Hello. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the plenary session on the information disorder, causes, risks, and remedies. Before I start, I would love to invite my key participants to take their seats here in the front. Thank you very much. So for those coming in, I would want to once again welcome to the plenary session on the information disorder, the causes, risks, and remedies. My name is Nadia Chachia, and I am the steering committee member of the Youth Coalition on Internet Governance. And it is my pleasure to host this discussion to look at the different remedies that are being developed on the different stakeholder fronts. And I'm excited to see and hear your views during this session, so I encourage you to actively contribute to this session and actually question what is being said here today in front. But to put this session into perspective, the information disorder is distorting people's ability to make sense of the world around them, and it threatens the democratic processes around the world. While this is not a new phenomenon, the problem is compounded by both the speed the information travels in this network world and the technological and cultural filter bubbles in which we live our lives. This is a problem that impacts us all. So today we will be focusing on the remedies of the information disorder. And just to clarify, we would like to move away from the term fake news. This term is just too small to describe the complexity that we face that's involved surrounding this topic and has been sensationalized in our society. The Council of Europe published a report recently by thought leader Claire Wardle from First Draft News on the information disorder and promoted a framework which was adopted that dissects the information pollution phenomenon in 3 types. So we talk about misinformation. That's when false information is shared, but no harm is meant. We looked at disinformation, where false information is shared with the intent to harm people. And also malinformation, when genuine information is shared to cause harm, which is often by moving information designed to stay private into the public sphere. So this leads me to the question for today. How can we address the information disorder? We will have some key participant interventions by the European Commission, IDFI, the Council of Europe, Google, and the Digital Opportunities Foundation, and it will be my pleasure to introduce them in a moment. But first, I would like to open the floor and hear your concerns, which we then can have a look at throughout the course of our session, and giving our key participants an indication of the points that you would like them to address during their interventions. So we have an open mic here in the middle. So please do come up and share your concerns and state your name and affiliation. And don't forget that you can also add your concerns to the word cloud through menti.com, which is anonymous. So while I invite you to come to the microphones and share with us what your concerns are, I would like to ask the moderator of the Fake News Ideas Lab flash session to provide a brief overview of the major concerns that were addressed during that session and their conclusions.
Yes, now it's on, I apologize. My name is Claudia Scandal. I am a EuroDiG fellow, and together with my colleague Virginia, we moderated the session this early afternoon. So the main takeaways from that are that there are still an abundance of challenges that have to be addressed on 3 levels. So governments, internet platforms and businesses, and the users. But with threat also comes opportunity. So for AI and algorithms, we can create better designs, and we can also educate citizens to be more informed about how they use the internet. There is still a large gap between technology experts and policymakers, and it's important to try to close that gap. And we also need to be more active and transparent about disinformation. For example, in the political sphere, who is funding who is funding campaigns, and the kind of overall importance of the demonetization of advertising contents and platforms. And this needs to be done on a multi-stakeholder kind of level. Thank you.
Hello? Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other concerns from the audience that anybody would like to raise? Ooh. No one has concerns about the information disorder. So while we wait for incoming participation from either the audience but also from our online participants, I would like to ask for our first intervention to start with our first intervention and introduce Mr. Paolo Cesarini, the head of the unit responsible for media convergence and social media within DJ Communication Networks, Content and Technology at the European Commission. For the last 10 years, he has also been teaching EU competition law as visiting professor at Siena University and as lecturer at the universities of Turin and Montpellier. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Cesarini, and I give you the floor, and kindly would like to ask you to stick to the time limit of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Nadia. Well, I can see that there are concerns popping up there on the screen in the meantime. Propaganda, governance, surveillance, lack of ethical data handling, poor data cleaning, impact of residual or lazy data, state surveillance, it comes again. Well, all these concerns so far, I think they've been widely discussed in the last months at the European Commission, which has organized a number of consultations, also created a high-level group to address a phenomenon which is far from being easy to deal with. And indeed, the first issues that we had to deal with is what is the phenomenon we want to address? There were several definitions. The work done at the Council of Europe, indeed, it is an important one. The concept of information disorder has, I think, is groundbreaking work that has been done. The approach taken by the Commission, it is a bit more narrow in scope. We are not dealing with misinformation or malinformation, we're dealing with disinformation. And disinformation is now defined as, and I quote by memory, verifiable, false or misleading information which is created, promoted, or amplified, disseminated online for profit, for economic gain, or to intentionally deceive the public and to cause public harm. So there are several elements in this definition. The most important, I think, it is about the harm that can be caused to democracies. The public harm, it is strictly linked to the protection of the functioning of our democracies, in particular as regard to things, the electoral processes, so the issues linked to propaganda, essential, and which can be orchestrated by state or not state actors, which are, can be from third countries or from domestic groups. The phenomenon is far from being linear and easy to apprehend in a single formula. And another element of this, and the other, it is about harm that can be created to public policies. That is very important because, you know, the sustainability of it and the credibility of an institutional system relies on the good communication that policymakers can have with the public at large. If there are messages which blur the actual intentions of policymakers, areas which are very touchy, which are very important, such as immigration, health, climate change, finance, you name it, can be, in fact, distorted in the perception of the public and therefore be difficult to implement in a correct way. This definition, by the way, excludes pure journalistic errors and satire. It is important to keep that in mind because one of the most important problems is how to avoid remedies that would encroach on the fundamental principle, which is freedom of expression. How to avoid that the information space is polluted while at the same time giving people the possibility to use internet and other means of communication to freely express their views and opinions. So it's far from being an easy topic. The answer to that it is that, and this comes also very strongly out of the public consultation and the EuroBarometer survey that has been carried out in the last months, the answer cannot only be at the national level, there is a need for an answer at the EU level. Internet, first of all, because disinformation knows no borders. Many member states are affected by disinformation campaigns or orchestrated manipulation of public opinions in several areas, and different areas, but sometimes by the same actors. And because internet has no borders, so the origin of the piece of information can come from another country and affect the population across the board. So the answer to avoid fragmentation of responses has to be coordinated at a higher level, while keeping in mind that there is a wide margin for member states due to the principle of subsidiarity to remain active and to do the things that are needed at the national level. Furthermore, this is a phenomenon that it is in constant evolution as the technologies that support and which have been harnessed by malicious actors are constantly evolving, and therefore a response cannot be simply done once forever and has to be constantly evaluated and adjusted to the changing needs that are and will be coming up as the phenomenon evolves. At the point in time while we are speaking, there are a certain main line of actions that are going to be implemented in the next weeks and months. And revolves around three main concepts. The first is transparency. Transparency means, in essence, to start with a self-regulatory process while reserving the possibility for a stronger action if the self-regulatory process would fail to deliver the expected results by the end of this year. And when I talk about transparency, I talk about something very concrete. I think we need more transparency about the flows of money that finance purveyors of disinformation, and we need to cut those flows of money to demonetize the websites that are systematically purveying false information. We need more transparency about political advertising, which has come up quite prominently during the Congress debates the last fall in the United States. We need more transparency about the human versus automatic interactions by bots, and about the accounts which do not hide any real individual behind, the fake accounts. We also need more transparency about the sources of information, and the platforms are required to elaborate systems that would enable users of such platforms to better identify where the information comes from, whether the sources are trustworthy or not, by elaborating indicators that are useful for that purpose, and that will require also a strict cooperation with the media sector, of course. So has to dilute bad contents with good contents without falling into censorship or surveillance. The idea is to give more prominence to content which is trustworthy, and the trustworthiness is established on the basis of a set of criteria which are objective in nature and reflect the interests and the practices of the good journalism. And finally, we need transparency as regards the data. We need to have access to the platform's data for research purposes, to better map disinformation campaigns and the spread online of these campaigns. We need this data is in order to switch from a reactive approach to a preemptive approach. To act faster means also to be able to understand where possible targets of disinformation are and on which topics are going to develop. The second point, it is about credibility of the information. The credibility requires that our societies to be better equipped to sort the falsehood from the truth. And this cannot be done by the government, because no minister of truth, of course, can be the solution to this problem. This needs to be done by the engagement of real professionals, those investigative journalists that probably will not have a position in the newsrooms, which are cutting down, unfortunately, in their own stuff, but they could be usefully employed into emerging sectors such as fact-checking. We are creating, or we are trying to create a network of fact-checkers across Europe in order to develop best practices, to share information, to have a common approach to this information, and for that the Commission will provide a digital service infrastructure which will be used also to link the work of fact-checkers with the researchers. And when I say researchers, I think about computer scientists, I think network analysts, I think about, of course, experts in communication and political scientists, because all these competences, all these skills are necessary in order to have a real-time mapping of phenomena that can deeply affect our democracies, and therefore they need to have the means, we need to have the means to combat them. Finally, the third point, it is about the diversity, and that is a tricky one. Diversity of information is a tricky one. How to ensure in the long run that citizens can have access to a diversified information landscape when we know that the business model of traditional journalism is in deep crisis. So we need to activate tools, also financial tools, to support training of journalists, modernization of showrooms, uptake of new technologies that enable a faster identification of information and content verification, but also new technologies that are used for the public good, for social good, like blockchain, artificial intelligence, cognitive algorithms that indeed can propel new forms of journalism like data journalism and educate eventually our audiences to be more demanding when it comes to the quality of information they get online. This is on the supply side, but we need also to operate on the demand side, because in order for audiences to be demanding, they need to be critically alerted and to be able to read critically the information they get, whether off or online. So a lot of, yes, those are the last words. So the last words are about the need to deploy resources to up to a scale which was not done so far, to promote media literacy actions, and started from grassroots organization in all member states with a better organization, again, like for fact-checkers at the EU level, to avoid duplications and to develop best practices, not only for the schools, so for young generations, but also for the older generations, with adapted tools for each of the two groups of citizens.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cesarini. On a small logistical point, may I ask if the other microphone, which is over there, if it could be moved down, so that if we go slightly over time, I have the opportunity to intervene. But thank you very much. We did go slightly, but I will give a little bit additional time to accommodate this. So before we go into our second intervention, I just wanted to have a look at the word cloud. And I have actually invited the EuroDiG fellow Virginia Balchunaite to give a short outline of the major concerns that were raised online and by participants here in the room.
So thank you very much, everybody, for giving out a lot of various issues that we can focus on. And so people were addressing their concerns about the trust issues, for example, which can be resulted in people decreasing participation in political affairs, for example, in voting. And also people were concerned about spamming, which were seen on the screens with a lot of spam. And as well, people were not sure between the fake advertising and fake news, how to verify who can be verifying it, and how can people trust the information they find online. Then another issue expressed was the national security, and for example, in the regional areas, for example, in the Baltic states, which is affected by the Russian propaganda and Russian trolls, as well as in Ukraine. And then also divided society, because people are living these days in their own informational bubbles, so they are not expressed to different types of information. And also media literacy is really important, and critical thinking, which is discouraged. And also data breaches and corporate surveillance.
Great, thank you very much, Virginia. So, having looked at this, I wanted to ask, are there any remote participants who had any questions? No, not at this time. So then I would like to move into the next intervention and invite Anna Kakalashvili, who is an analyst at the Institute for the Development of Freedom of Information, and for the European, and works on the European Union-funded project promoting prosecutorial independence through monitoring and engagement. Ms. Kakalashvili has been involved in the internet governance domain for over 6 years and is a member of the Internet Society, or ISOC, chapter in Georgia and founding member of the ISOC Blockchain Special Interest Group. I would now like to ask Anna to take the floor for her intervention. Was there a microphone over there? That could be. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's working. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me start with a small introduction. I will try to be brief. So fake news, disinformation, propaganda, it's satiring social media and driving the content of the important political conversations among us all, citizens, stakeholders, governments, everyone. We're so taken by that. News and information, we see that they have become weaponized and aimed at against the very institutions and values that the freedom of speech was supposed to protect. Trust me, I've been around here and we've been talking about it for a long time. Information, freedom of speech, but situation, and I'm sure this is not my personal view, has really gotten worse. We have observed with our eyes the US election, the French election, how the fake news have been so much influencing the process and the free will of the voters, and we still don't know what's happening. And this scenario has somehow caused the complete collapse of public trust in democratic institutions. And governments are so fearful right now of this populist nationalism that they are scrambling and trying to find policies that are aimed at combating fake news. So it's not that they are trying to somehow censor anyone, but they are trying their best to somehow find a solution in the regulatory terms. And this is where we come to sometimes a confusing situation. For example, Germany adopted legislation obliging social media companies to pay fines up to 50 million euros if they fail to delete illegal content within 24 hours. I'm sure we know of that. And Italy, they have introduced a bill aimed at preventing the manipulation of online information, and the fine for non-journalistic website or social media that publish or disseminate fake news, exaggerated or tenderous news regarding data or facts that are manifested false or unproven, they may get fined, and let me look at my stats, 5,000 euro, sorry. So we see governments are really trying, and it's not that they want something bad. What I've learned is that there is mostly nowhere the scenario where you have a good and the bad on the scale. It's always one good value against another good value. And it's depending very much on the situation and on the circumstances and on everything, which one will go up and which one will go down. I'm very confused when it comes to this fake news topics, but let me tell you, solving the problem with regulations, it certainly must create more problem if done wrongly and not very carefully. Government regulations of fake news would be cure far worse than the disease. And especially me, coming from Georgia, this region, it's so, you have to be so careful. This is Georgia and other countries, my neighboring countries, and other countries that are just being, just establishing these democratic values, the principles of the good governance, rule of law. It is a very tiny and very thin line to walk when it comes to regulating the most crucial thing, which is freedom of speech and freedom of information. Not that we don't have to, we have to wash our hands and not do anything, of course, no, but keeping the balance and seizing what is in that situation more important to defend, and at the same time also tackle the issue that you're so critically facing, which is the fake news and what it does to, as I said, for example, free expression of the voters. It is very crucial to find a balance and keep up to it. And let me tell you that stats, I looked at some stats, and unfortunately, for example, this economist YouGov poll did this interview with people, and they asked whether courts should be able to shut down media outlets for publishing broadcasting stories. And let me look at my stats. 28% were in favor, 29% were opposed, and 49% undecided. And of course, there are those who are more Republicans, they do want a regulation. So stats are not always in favor of what I'm saying, that we don't need a harsh regulation, but you need to understand that stats are not something we should be always relying upon. And there are bigger values we have to always keep in mind when it comes to regulations. So let me tell you that we, in Georgia, in other countries, I'm sure my neighboring countries, we look all up to European Union and their regulations. This is where we strive. We have this association agreement, for example, and we have so many standards to implement and so many things we have to keep up with Europe. And you have to be our example of defending the most crucial value. This is defending freedom of speech, freedom of information. And I'm sure there are ways to tackle fake news. In other ways, for example, this previous speaker has already said about transparency of media outlets and many other ways to just avoid this kind of harsh authoritarian regulations. And of course, and this will be more or less my last point, to avoid the questions later, we have to make a very clear distinction about what is propaganda and what is other fake news. Propaganda and information war, that is something far, far, far more dangerous than anything else. So propaganda has to be tackled and treated and somehow not regulated but solved in one way, which is, for example, the governments, first of all, have to officially recognize that there is another state fighting with information, my country, and it has to be officially recognized, and there has to be strategies, anti-propaganda activities, standards of financial transparency for many different organizations, whether it's non-government media. And then we have the fake news of other types. This is someone, I don't know, sending some information, whatever the aim is, parody, social, political, financial, with other aims. And this has to be tackled separately or somehow other way around. But what I always say and what I will keep saying, do not make it easy for you. Do not go for a very strict, harsh regulation. This is very, very dangerous, not only because it might create censorship, but it might also create self-censorship. And that is
Thank you
even,
for your commentary.
Thank you so much.
Sorry to have to intervene, but I would like to move on to the next thing. So first of all, thank you very much. But I would like to use this opportunity to open the floor and ask if there were any projects or remedies that you have been engaging with or that you know about that you would like to share. So therefore, we will first open a word cloud. Yes. And please do submit your projects and remedies. What have you been working on? What have you been contributing to? What have you seen online? And also our remote participants, please do send in what you're working on. We're really interested to see what is out there locally, nationally, regionally, internationally. Very happy to have you join and participate this way. So while we collect all this information of the different types of projects and remedies there are, I would like to invite Jutta Kroll to comment on the network enforcement law against hate speech.
Okay. Anna Kakalashvili has already mentioned the German law, so as a German I just wanted to explain if there are any questions about the law, or I can just explain a little more in detail how it works. It's called the Act to Improve Enforcement of the Law in Social Networks, and I think from the title it becomes clear that it's a law that tries to make the law that we already have in the German Penal Code to come into force also on the networks. So the new law didn't make anything illegal that had not been illegal before in Germany. It also only applies to the dissemination of illegal content via networks. And then it's also important to know that it only applies to social networks that have more than 2 million people registered to the network. And that is important to understand because it's not that we have a different law for networks that have more registrants and we have another law which is less questioning for smaller social network laws. So it makes the law applicable to only those big social networks, and that is because the government recognized that it's more necessary to address the networks where it can be spread. The false information, the fake news can be spread to a broader audience. Second thing that is necessary to add is that the law differentiates between those content that is obviously illegal, so where you can recognize from within a very short time that it's illegal, and then you need to take down this content within 24 hours. For any other content where it's questionable whether it's illegal or not, there is a time span of 7 days where it needs to be taken into due consideration whether this content needs to be blocked or taken down. So, and I'm ready to answer any other question about the law. I'm not defending the law, and I really appreciate that we had a critical debate in advance of the law, and the critical debate is going on. There is set a time frame for reporting of those social networks that the law applies to, and I think the law came into force in October last year, and the first reports are due at the end of July this year. So then we will know also in a transparent, very transparent manner how it was handled by the social network platforms and how it really could come into effect. And I do think we also need to continue this debate whether such laws can work, how they do work, when we have seen the first reports from the social networks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the audience who would like to come up to the microphone and talk about any projects that you're working on or anything that you've seen, or you have any concerns that you would like to address? We have an open mic session, so if there's an open mic, please do go ahead that way. Yes, please.
Hello, Dominic Scher from the Council of Europe, but I'm speaking as a private person. I just would like to mention this. So I do not have my own project that I would like to present, but I have been wondering if we just block the content that is online and that we consider is not suitable or is not on our standards, are we actually helping this problem to be solved, or are we merely fighting against the symptoms? Because if we block content, it just goes away very unnoticed, and most of the citizens won't realize. So I kind of doubt that it will actually help to the question to find where this borderline is, to also make a broad society aware where this borderline is and what is acceptable and what is not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also believe that Mark Carville is attending this session, who is the head of the International Online Policy at the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sports of the UK government. Perhaps you could share some comments.
Yes, thank you, Nadia. Thank you very much for inviting me to take the mic to say a few words about the UK government policy development in this area, and at this very timely session on disinformation. We welcome the fact that there is now a lot of international interest in developing responses to this fast emerging risk of disinformation, as here at EuroDiG. And the UK government supports a coordinated international response on this issue, in particular how to deal with maliciously intended interference in sovereign democratic processes. That is a key challenge for governments, but we must address those challenges in concert with the stakeholder community and the private sector. Thank you. The private sector, the technical community, civil society. And I have to say, at the moment, there's no evidence of that happening in the UK in terms of direct threats to our democratic processes, but we do recognize that this is a risk. There are threats here that we need to be prepared for. We have a team looking at this in my ministry, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. And we're working on this under our digital charter, which is our approach to developing norms of behavior in the internet sphere and dealing with online harms and threats to the welfare of our citizens. And this issue of disinformation, the risk of disinformation, is a key element of that policy development. We don't have any laws yet, but we're doing a lot of work. And we're working with the technical community, the social media platforms, and civil society, as I say, and also with European and international partners on this. And we are focusing on 5 areas. Firstly, we do need to get our facts. We need to undertake a lot more research into understanding this problem. And that's a point that was well made earlier on here in this session. Secondly, on media literacy, we are looking at the opportunities for developing education and guidance for our citizens to enable them to have the skill to differentiate between fact and fiction. So we're looking at that. We're working with our colleagues in our education ministry on that.
May I ask you to come to your concluding remarks?
Yeah, okay. I'll just finish quickly on my final couple of elements of our policy, which I think is important to make clear. We're working with the technical sector to develop really a framework of voluntary practices that we in government can support. And we're checking if we have the right regulation in place. We're well aware of the risks that Anna in particular articulated so well about an approach which is going to be heavy-handed in impact on freedom of expression and so on. And we're looking across our strategic communications in the whole of government. So I hope that's a helpful contribution. Thank you. Sorry for overrunning a bit.
Thank you very much for your contribution. So I'm very pleased that there are so many projects coming up on the screen. And I wanted to ask if the EuroDiG fellow, Claudia Scando, would like to give an overview of the projects that have been submitted here online.
Just need to move this down a little bit. Yes, hello again, everybody. So a lot of the initiatives are focusing on education and online resources. I believe the first one that was submitted was anonymous, if I got that reference correctly, which is, I guess, one option. There's also a lot of initiatives about training journalists and trust initiatives for journalists, cyber hygiene training. There was one, Dzień Bezpiecznego Internetu, which, if my university Russian is serving correctly, is the Day of Secure Internet Day. Stop fake news initiatives, research being performed by think tanks and other organizations, the no hate speech movement, and lots of studies being performed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to have a look at Keti Kohlatse, who's the EuroDiG Fellow remote moderator. Is there a question from the online community that they wanted to share with us? Currently, there are no questions. So I'm reaching back out to the audience here. Do you have any questions at this moment in time? Otherwise, we will move on to the next intervention. So for the next intervention, I'm pleased to present Mr. Patrick Pennings, head of the Information Society Department of the Council of Europe. Mr. Pennings has spent the last 25 years of his career with the Council of Europe contributing to the transformation processes of the organization and developing partnerships with international and national institutions. So currently heading the Information Society Department under Director General Human Rights and the Rule of Law, Mr. Pennings coordinates standard setting and cooperation activities in the fields of media, internet governance, data protection, and cybercrime.
Okay, thank you. Since this is supposed to be interactive, how many of you have read a paper newspaper today? How many have read a paper newspaper today? Okay. It says more about your age than about your ability to read. Second, who read an online newspaper today? Yeah, a couple more. Also a very informed community. Who read an article on a newspaper of which you have no subscription? Yeah? The New York Times, The Guardian, yeah, I see. How many paid for your reading of those that? So you paid because you read an article on them. Well, that's quite exceptional, quite frankly. I will present you, I brought for you, especially from Strasbourg, France, the most potent broadcaster device that you have ever seen. It takes me a second. You're all puzzled, but you all have it in your pockets. This has become the most potent broadcasting device that we're talking about. I will talk to you about 5 different things. First, I will speak about trust, because when we speak about false information, basically we're speaking about trust and trusted information. Second, I will speak about news avoiders and news skimmers. I will speak about cocooning and about the actors. Trust. The Edelman Trust Barometer, anyone heard about it? Edelman Trust Barometer? Yeah? Media is the least trusted institution in all or almost all of the countries surveyed by the Edelman Trust Barometer. Distrusted in 22 out of 28 countries. The ones in which it is least distrusted are China, Malaysia, and some other countries which play in the same category. 6 in 10 people do not know how to tell good journalism from rumors and falsehoods. 1 in 4 trust social media for news and information. It's very little. So I'm not surprised, Mark, that in fact we need to do a lot more study on what is really the impact of false news and false information before we draw some quick conclusions. And I think the first lesson is about false news or disinformation. First lesson is make sure that you get your facts right before distributing more information about disinformation. Because it's a hype, and the reason why the Council of Europe did the study and called it disinformation disorder is because everything was heaped up on one single file, which was called fake news and which was used by any actor that did not like the news that was being produced. Second, I will speak about news avoiders and news skimmers. 33% of us, I'm not going to ask you because it may be a little bit more difficult to raise your hands, but 33% of the interviewed read less news compared to the year before. 33%. 19% avoid news altogether. 40% find news too depressing. So, what's the answer? The answer, my next point, cocooning. That is, people start to live in trusted cells where they gather the information. Maybe positive note, Giacomo, is that the traditional media are gaining in trust in a number of countries. And Mark, for your relief, in the United Kingdom is one of the highest scores for trust in the public media. So that's also quite important to mention. Now, just to also reveal a little bit to you that we are not alone in this battle or in this fight against disinformation. I attended a conference yesterday called Addressing Political Disinformation Online, the Role of Governments and Internet Platforms. Any idea who the organizer of this was? Microsoft. You were going to say Facebook. Well, you were not very far because also Facebook and Google participated. The key thing there is that we're all in this together. There is a common goal. Obviously, there are some issues that need to be settled separately. But when you listed the key actors that had to be involved in tackling the issue of fake news, I think you left out a couple. I think it's not only governments, it is not only internet companies, it is not only the consumers, but it's also the technical community. We speak about very often, when we speak about data protection, for example, we speak about data protection by design. To which extent can we ensure that in the designing of algorithms, of self-learning algorithms, of artificial intelligence, which create filter bubbles, which create a distribution of information, rapid distribution of information and disinformation. It's not that this has never existed before, but it's a question of how, with which speed is this currently being distributed. And it's also what can companies, what can technical community do in order to create a number of speed bumps that may allow us to countenance the spreading of fake news, whether that is being done through governmental agencies or through individuals who are seeking quick gain. So I think it's important that we also do not forget about the role of civil society in this. In this room, there's of course all the different multi-stakeholder actors that are involved in internet governance and dialogue, but the key participation is definitely also on civil society. And there is quite a number of things to be done. All those actors which I mentioned have their specific role to play. The media actors have their specific role to play with regards to quality journalism, with regards to ensuring that journalists receive the correct education, but that also in there is a lot of work to be done on debunking disinformation. So when we're speaking about this, look at what each of those parts of our society can do to debunk disinformation, because we are all in this together, and that's why a multi-stakeholder approach to this also applies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pendix, for your contribution. So after this intervention, I would now like to invite Tamar Kinsurashvili to give a short intervention. She's the Executive Director of the Media Development Foundation since 2017. She served as Deputy Secretary of the National Security Council of Georgia in 2010 to 2013 and was the first elected General Director of the Georgian Public Broadcaster and Deputy Director of the CSO Liberty Institute. Tamar is Associate Professor at Elias State University, teaching media ethics and propaganda research methods. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadia. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like totally agree with you that the problem is much more complex rather than term of fake news. But I would rather say that it's more complex than even information disorder, because propaganda is a part of hybrid warfare, and not only countries like Georgia and Ukraine suffering from this problem because our countries are occupied by neighboring country, but traditional democracies as well. We have seen intervention in election in traditional democracy. And the major challenge of the modern world is how undemocratic countries use the democracy and democratic institutions like media against democracy and open society. As regard to solutions, of course, we need collaborative approach when it comes to fight against hybrid warfare. Not only fact checkers or professional media outlets can address this problem, but we need collaboration with government, educators, because it's about strategic communication as well. It's about transparency, not only media outlets, but other actors, political parties, because it's related to money laundering and dirty money coming in our country and used against democracy itself. And major problem you mentioned, distrust in media, is creating some kind of chaos in country, not to believe in anything. It's very sensitive, especially in post-Soviet societies, coming to the Soviet regime when we distrusted in everything. But democracy is about making informed choices. And we need to somehow preserve trust in quality media. It's easy to say, but difficult to achieve, because tabloid media inciting hate speech is more actually attractive, unfortunately, for our societies. And often this hate against different groups of our societies, or triggering historic trauma against our other neighbors, is a part of these propaganda methods. For instance, our organization is working on media content analysis, tracking verifying different kind of fake news, but we try to provide society with information about propaganda methods as well. The Turkophobia is a part of anti-Western sentiments in Georgia. There is an attempt to shift focus from current security threats Georgia is facing to historical one, saying that if Russia is occupied, why not Turkey? And it's especially dangerous when we have Muslim minorities in our countries, and it's related to inciting not only hate speech against these groups, but in some cases provoking and mobilizing radical groups against the minorities. Legal solutions, actually we have very liberal legislation and referring to European experiences of criminalizing hate speech is not solution in countries with lack of democracy and rule of law because for instance, the far-right party, Alliance of Patriots, recently initiated blasphemy law. It actually aims at protecting majority from minority rather than vice versa, which is more European experience rather than the remedy to solve the problem of hate speech, which might be easily translated in hate crimes. Speaking on our own experience, we are engaged in media literacy programs as well because society and social media users are also responsible for not misleading others. By sharing information, they become the disseminators of information, and this is a positive development on the one hand because anybody can be journalist and we have more pluralistic digital world, but on another hand, it's about responsibility, and we try to teach youth how to distinguish quality media program for unverified fake news or other types of content. This is in short, and I can answer the questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution.
Well, I'm representative of the country you mentioned, representative of civil society of Russia, and Academia of Russia, and I'd like to note that civil society in Russia is also imposing a huge threat due to the military propaganda against neighboring countries, and this is also a huge problem for Russian civil society who may be against some political interventions, and that's why it's also imposing a very huge threat. Maybe it's killing civil society. It's killing another positions which could be inconsistent with. So we have to initiate some projects, maybe to analyze what the military propaganda is, how internet and other media sources are used to widespread of the military propaganda, how internet could contradict the military propaganda, how it could spread in other relevant opinions, how it could be one possible media to distribute alternative opinions, to make friendly connections between, and I think EuroDiG as well, to have an opportunity to communicate formally and informally with representatives of Ukraine, of Georgia, of other countries, to have communications to make peace, a different context, because it's maybe the only source to communication between societies to maybe to combat this situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your contribution, and it really excites me that there seems to be a lot of questions now from the floor. However, before I would like to open the floor, I would like to invite Clara Sommier to give a short intervention and to show the perspective from Google regarding this issue. Clara Sommier works within the EU Public Policy and Government Relations team at Google in Brussels. She focuses on how to strengthen the positive impact of the web and make sure that web remains a safe place, and follows as such actively the work of the European institutions. Before joining Google, she worked at the European Parliament for more than 3 years, where she focused on security and fundamental rights. So please welcome Clara Sommier. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. So indeed, yes, it's working. Thank you very much. So indeed, I will try to explain very shortly how we address and how we try to address disinformation at Google and on YouTube. So first, I'm sure you're aware, our Google mission is to make the word information universally accessible and useful. This is why, from the very start, we've tried to address the issue that we were seeing on our platform, from spam to content farms to malware. And the work that we are doing now on fake news, we see it as a continuation of this first work. So first, what has to be said is that at this stage, disinformation, as was rightly pointed out by the other panelists, take many forms. This is why there isn't a one-size-fits approach, which doesn't mean that we doesn't take it seriously. And let me be very clear on that. For us, if we show a misinformation on a platform, it means that we haven't fulfilled our mission and we haven't served the users, and it's a mistake. And it's not something that we want to do. This is why we're trying to work on different tracks, because we know that only one angle won't be enough to tackle disinformation, and we've developed 5 different tracks we're working on to have this 360-degree approach on fake news and disinformation. So first, what are we doing? The first pillar of our work is try to promote good content. So we have done a couple of changes in our products to make sure that we're going to promote qualitative and authoritative sources when you're looking for information on Google search as well as in Google News. And we're trying to demote low-quality content as well to make sure you find the right and truthful information when you're looking for information. The second pillar, of course, is to fight back against bad actors. We've been hearing that, and it has been mentioned by the Commission. Money is one of the incentives as well, and one way of fighting back against bad actors is cutting the traffic as well as the money flows. And for that, we've made some changes to a policy on advertising to make clear that platforms that are misleading our users cannot use our advertising service. If those bad actors cannot use ads, they won't make money, and we hope it will cut one part of the problem. The third part is about empowering the users. We've seen the role that fact-check tag can make, and this is why we've developed fact-check tags on Google News as well as on Google Search. An article is fact-checked when it's fact-checked by a fact-checking community or a news publisher. Another point about empowering the consumer, part of this third pillar of activity, has been mentioned already, is media literacy. It's also a huge part where we see that we have a role to play together with the civil society. This is why we partner with different civil society organizations across the world, and I can tell you maybe about one concrete initiative that we've launched recently, which is called Be Internet Legend. And I really encourage you to have a look at it if you don't know this tool yet. We've been working with leading child safety organizations to put together a curricula of activities to teach children how to be safe online. It comes in an online format with lots of games. It's very interactive and very powerful, as well as an offline format, a handbook that you can download or get shipped. For now, we've only launched it in the UK, but we plan on launching it into more languages and more European countries as it comes. And one specific part of this curriculum focuses on disinformation, on learning to recognize what is real and what isn't. It's one big part of this curriculum. The fourth dimension that I want to mention today is the support to the news industry. We've seen that if we want to help a user find the right information should be out there. And this is why it is part of our mission as well to support the news industry in that regard. We've developed the Digital Innovation Fund as well as the Google News Initiative recently. We try to support innovative way for the press to display content, as well as finance research and projects that can make a difference. One example is a UK organization, FactMeta, that is using machine learning to see if that can be a way to tackle disinformation. And it's one of the projects that we're supporting to see if that could be a solution. Another way we try to protect and support the press is on the subscription. Maybe some of you have had this experience recently while reading a news article for free after sometimes being asked the option to either directly subscribe or to pay to be able to see the content of the article. That's a feature that has been asked by the news industry and that we've incorporated lately and help to put into place to try to support them. And my last point, before we can open up for discussion and questions, is the collaboration that we're putting into place with our other actors. It has been said again, and I can only reinforce this point. It's only if we work all together that there can be a solution, and this is why we try to support research as well as other projects. I will only mention 2 projects that I find particularly interesting. First is First Draft. It's a community that really work on the fact-checking side and on supporting the new newsroom. They've been working a lot on the election as well. And the second one is the Trust Project. It's a project where they try to establish credibility indicators for media outlets. A very interesting one when we're faced with this difficult question on what is truthful or not, what is authoritative content or not. So those are only a few ways that we're trying to prevent the spread of disinformation on this platform, but we know that the process isn't over and we're looking forward to engage with all the stakeholders.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Ms. Sommier. I'm very pleased to have had a diverse perspective from the different stakeholders that are present today, ranging from civil society, business, and government. So I would like to open the floor for you to ask any questions or make any comments or raise any concerns. So please do walk up to the mic.
Hello, I am Oksana Prihodko, Ukraine European Media Platform. I have very simple question. Does EuroDiG website have any mechanism to remove fake information or disinformation? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Unfortunately, I'm not a representative of the EuroDiG Secretariat, so I don't feel comfortable making any commentary on that. However, this session is recorded, and I have made a note of your question, so I will ensure that I'll give the question to the EuroDiG Secretariat. Thank you for your question. However, are there any other questions or comments that reflect on the comments or questions of the speaker? Please.
Hello, everyone. Hello. My name is Amir Khan. I'm a EuroDiG fellow. Now, my question is, it is being mentioned that the end user should differentiate between propaganda and between the fake news. But the question is, how can an end user know that this is propaganda and this is fake news? Because as an end user, we normally believe what we see and we just check the number of shares a news has. So we just believe what we see. So how can we know that this is a propaganda and not a fake news? And how can end users be encouraged more towards critical thinking instead of just believing what they are seeing? Thank you.
Is there anyone who would like to take this question? Mr. Cesarini?
Yeah, it's a valid point, and I think the answer lies with it's two-pronged. One side you've mentioned it, need to develop critical spirit and critical reading by the users, but that is a long-term action. The other part of the solution is to create a community of fact-checkers and researchers. I mean, the credibility of the information requires that is a professional endeavor to debunk news. I don't think that is possible to do otherwise. I don't know whether somebody else.
Propaganda is, of course, also as old as the existence of political interaction. I think it's a very specific form of disinformation, which has a specific objective, which has a lot of means behind it, and is organized to destabilize states, communities, ensure that discrepancies are being promoted in societies. There are a number of states that are willingly embarking in this type of propaganda war, you could say. But that's not the sole problem. If you look at, for example, the spread of information, disinformation on Facebook in Myanmar, which led to ethnic cleansing, or to Kenya, where the fake opinion polls have made a completely different political spectrum in society. These are the things that we have to look at. And of course, political propaganda is certainly part of that, because it's organized to disorient and to destabilize other countries or communities.
There are many tools to verify information or photos. Only indicators that the news is shared with large number of people is not the reason to believe that it's truth. And this is a method they use, very sensitive topic. In some cases, nobody reads the content itself, the headline and the picture and visual effects. There are some criticism regarding fact-checking, whether it's necessary or not, because some people think that it's like belief. People believe in certain things and there is no reason to debunk. But I think it's about labeling, naming and shaming, because if you show based on facts, not on alternative propaganda messages, but based on facts that somebody is lying, and you show the profile of these media outlets, who is behind this media, because it's very easy to launch online media platforms in modern worlds, and they often use well-known brands. For instance, we have Fox News G disseminating fake content. They never use other less known names, or USA Radio or Guardian, etc. This all helps us to critically assess the content we are sharing on Facebook and acknowledge our own responsibility. This is in short. No.
And to add to that, one thing that we are doing on Google is also when you're searching for a news outlet, we try to display in the first category what we call the knowledge box. That's what appears before the search results, what we know about the news publishers, what type of topics are covered, if the publisher won any prize, and to help you understand a bit better what's behind any news outlet that you can see out there.
Giacomo Mazzoni from the European Broadcasting Union. Some questions out of the debate. First, we have seen through some of the projects that are mentioned there and on which we are working currently that debunking and fact-checking are a waste of time if they are not done hand in hand with the social media and the search engines. For instance, we made a research with the EPFL in Lausanne, is part of the Media Road project, in which we see that if you don't access in real time to the information that the platform owns on, for instance, on the impact of bots or on the speed on which some news are propagating, then you are fact-checking something that is completely irrelevant and you are missing the real ones. So without tight cooperation and transparency, there is no possibility to do anything. There is another ex post problem that we have as traditional media, that is the platform, they take out a lot of material from the web, not only the news, but all the categories of material that can be removed, and they self-analyze, self-judge, and self-absolve about the work that has been done. Typical example is Right to be Forgotten. The analysis has been made on data that are not shared by a board of experts that has been decided by the direct interested company. and you cannot verify what has been taken out, etc. We know only because part of the material that were mentioned on the website of the public service broadcaster are not anymore accessible. So, for instance, BBC take in account what has been removed, and many of the things has been removed. We don't see any reason for being removed, unless that was somebody that was bothered by relevant public contents that does want to be shared with other people. So there is a problem, cannot be judge and party at the same time. And I think that this risk we have also in the sounding board and the group that has been put in place, because there also, who is at the end of the judge and the party? Who is responsible for that? I think that this is something that we need to be very careful in mind, to have very careful in mind in the next month. Last point is, I think that the exercise of the platform that the group that the high-level expert group has recommended on fake news need to be fact-checked through some concrete experience. We have some elections in the period in which you will improve this. Let's work together. And let's see if the platform and the traditional media can cooperate together and work together, and which tools we need. Because on the real experience, we can get the real lessons about what works and what doesn't work. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. I believe Mr. Penix would like to reply to this.
Yes, gladly. If it's supposed to work. Oh, it works. It does work. Well, on debunking, I fully agree that it has to be done together. Media, social media, technical community as well. Bots, speed bumps, the way to deal with all of it has to be done in tight cooperation and transparency. Now, transparency leads me to your second question. That is, to which extent can we as governments, as communities, leave the sole responsibility to internet intermediaries? That's a big question. To which extent is the work that is being done transparent? Some call the social media and service providers as enigmatic regulators based on community standards, which is all very fine, but the issue is really to which extent do our governments, states, give out of hand a task which is really a governmental task. That is to ensure that the standards that we are applying are balanced, are foreseeable, and that the outcomes are also foreseeable. So that is something, it's not, in an earlier session, the question was raised, who's read the terms of service of this or that application that you may be using? And obviously, as always, there is very few that say that they have read it, except Giacomo, of course. But very few have read it, and that is almost logical. So there's also a number of recommendations which we can make with regards to the terms of service. But the terms of service of internet service providers are not value-free. They're not value-free. And that we have to realize. And if those values correspond to the values of the community in which you live, they're called community standards, but we don't know actually who has defined those standards necessarily and whether they correspond to the legislation in a given country. So they're enigmatic regulators. And we need more transparency on that. I have a question back to Giacomo, actually, and that is, there has been a tradition for media regulation. And the question I would have is there a space for social media regulators, as we have in the traditional media for the past decades? That's a question to the European Broadcasting Union.
Thank you very much. I believe Mrs. Cesarini also had a very brief comment.
Yeah, I cannot agree more about the cooperation between platforms and fact-checkers, and I cannot agree more about the fact that the fact-checking activities need to evolve into something else. They need to become much more robust when it comes to the outcome of their own investigations. They need to look not only at the sheer facts, but also the sources, and when I say sources of information, it means also the transparency of who provide the money to the source that have been debunked. So should be a transparency built into the activity of the fact checkers, which would be source checkers at the same time and researchers at the same time. So you mentioned the elections. Yes, that hints to one of the important points. Fact-checking cannot be done on everything, from the flat earth myth to the European elections that is coming up for the next year. The fact-checking activities needs to be organized by teams, and the teams which count needs to be at the forefront of a priority setting mechanism that is a shared priority setting. We have started this work the last week on the 31st. Actually, on the 29th, we started the forum activities to progress with the formulation of the rules for the code of practice. And 2 days later, we started a discussion amongst fact-checking organizations and technologists. Those are two aspects that goes hands in hands. And as regards fact-checking, my vision for the future fact-checking, it is really a complex set of activities. It starts with the identification of workflows and systems that streamline the methods that different fact-checking organizations across Europe applies to try to get the best out of it, and also to enhance the possibility for them to communicate and to exercise something that you have been hinting at. So who controls the controllers? Once the news has been debunked, who tell us that this debunking is actually reliable? So within that, I think the peer-to-peer controls that can be exercised from the different organizations that independently from any governmental influence, I need to stress this point, the trustworthiness of the work that are going to be carried out within this network very much rely on two things: the conditions, the terms under which the fact-checking organization will be allowed into the network, so there must be ethical standards and professional standards clearly set out for that. Secondly, the fact that there is a readiness to be subject to a peer-to-peer review to avoid distortions in the materials that will emerge out of this. Now, another important point is fact-checking is not only about checking the news and then put it in a repository, in a database, which is a shared resources, which indeed is useful because avoids duplication of work and speed up the thing. But there are three other things that needs to be kept in mind when we talk the fact-checking, the source-checking of the future, of the next future, of the near future, which is tools. These organizations have not much money to buy the tools. Well, they might depend on the projects that Facebook and Google promote for them, but we need to have also a fact-checking organization that is independent from platforms, while being in cooperation with you.
May I ask to come to the last?
Yeah, but I think these are points that needs to be stressed. And the second point that needs to be stressed is about the cooperation with the platform for what? Well, you have the data, the fact checkers and the source checkers and the researchers need your data, and that it is an area of cooperation which is indispensable. The third point is about what we do with the media. This organization, this network is not an end in itself. It's not about shaming and naming and shaming only. It is about to provide the information to the media in order for them not to fall in the trap of contributing to amplification of disinformation because there is no time for them to be informed at the right moment about an attempt to, weaponize the information for the bad. So the fourth element is about whether or not fact-checking can become a business in itself. That is my final point. Whether fact-checking and this type of network can be a business in itself that cooperates not only with the platforms, but also with the media sector in order to develop a more comprehensive and collaborative media landscape across Europe.
Thank you very much. So, to summarize the session and present the final concluding remarks, I would like to invite Jutta Groth to come and take to the stage. She does research in national, European, and international projects concerning the use of digital media, issues of child protection, internet safety, data security, privacy, and digital literacy. Thank you very much to provide this final summary before we conclude this session.
Thank you, Nadia, for inviting me to do the summary of the session, and thank you to all the panelists for the huge input you've given to the discussion. Let me first come back to the keynote speaker we heard in advance of the session, and let me quote her. Claudia Luciana said, all human rights are impacted by the phenomena that we are facing now. And I do think this could be a guiding principle for all that have we discussed, keeping in mind human rights that are affected by the phenomena we face on the internet now, with fake news, with false news, or call it disinformation, or also propaganda. Coming to the points that have been discussed, I do think that it's very important that we see that there is an intention why disinformation is created, promoted, and amplified. And this intention is to cause harm to our democracies. And so when we talk about the remedies, we need to have in mind that most of these phenomena have made with intent to cause harm to democracies. And also, Paolo Cesarini mentioned that we need to consider how we can avoid remedies that would encroach on the fundamental principle of freedom of expression. So we are always in these two thoughts that we, on the one hand, need to ensure the right to freedom of expression on the one hand, which is a human right, but also to find effective remedies to the phenomenon. Then I do think it was very important from Anna Kakalashvili that she mentioned we need to differentiate between propaganda and fake news, and both need to be addressed with probably different remedies. And that was also part of the point that was made. It cannot be left to the users only to be able to differentiate between propaganda and between fake news, false news, or disinformation. We need to find remedies that address these phenomena in a different way. So let me have a look what I also mentioned. Yes, I do think Patrick Pennings made a very important point when he also said the technical community has to play a role here, and that there need to be found designs of artificial intelligence that can help to counteract the phenomena. And I do think that also Clara Sommier pointed out that Google is looking for those technical approaches, I would say. I don't say it's a solution, but it could be a technical approach to the phenomenon. Again, I'd like to quote Tamara Kindrashvili. I hope I pronounce your name well. I do think you made a very good point saying that democracy is about making informed choices. So, and this helps me going to something that I would like to present from the work our foundation is doing in Germany, and you might all have seen these leaflets on your chairs. It was one of the concerns that was mentioned about information disorder, saying while propaganda creators are very strong, positive, critical communicators lack the visibility. And I do think there can be done something about that. We have done a research, a study in Germany on 620 social engagement projects, where we had a look how these social engagement projects from civil society are using social media for their work. And what we found out is that also it's already known that this civil engagement has a fundamental promotion of democratic values. This can be reinforced when social media are used for civic society engagement. So there is an impact that goes beyond what they do for society when these projects use social media. And we have seen that very often these positive long-term effects are not on the first priority of the agenda of those people who engage for society, but when they see that they can achieve these long-term effects with their work with social media, they also strengthen their social media engagement. And then also the study substantiates that the use of social media for civic engagement has the potential to preventively counteract tendencies towards radicalization. What we can see is that we have heard a lot about fact-checking now, about what we can do against these false information, these fake informations. And with these social engagement projects, we see that they produce counter-narratives or community narratives against false information by the work they are doing once they spread the information about their work via social media. So therefore, they can to rather implicitly the promotion of democracy by the work they are doing. And I just would like to refer you to the website that is propagated on the leaflet, and there you will find the study results, I think about a month later after this conference. Thank you so much for listening, and have a nice evening.
Thank you very much. As we end this session and would like to close, this session focused on finding remedies. However, tomorrow's workshop 10 will look at this issue through the aspect of freedom of information. So should you wish to continue the discussion from a different angle, please, you are welcome to join that session tomorrow morning. Should you wish to read the report that was spoken about on the information disorder by the Council of Europe, you're most welcome to pick up a copy at the back. And for those who are online, you can find it on the Council of Europe website. So to end this session, I would like to thank the key participants for their contributions and their time and preparations. So thank you very much. I would also like to thank the organizing team who has spent their valuable volunteering time to come and organize this session. I would also like to thank the EuroDiG Secretariat for this opportunity and their support and contributions. Thank you very much. And before I forget, please make sure that if you would like to go to the gala this evening, the buses will leave in the next 5 minutes for the rest of the evening. So we hope to see you there. Good evening.